My dad told me I wasn't qualified for mother's surgery, then the nurse greeted me as the top doctor. They say the hands that heal can also tremble. Mine did, just once. But not from fear of the scalpel, nor the weight of responsibility. It trembled because I realized even after saving hundreds of lives, I still wasn't enough for the one man I needed to believe in me. My name is Dr. Layla Nasir, and I'm a 35-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon. I've walked through more hospital hallways than I have family dinners. I've stitched hearts back to life. But even that couldn't mend the fracture between me and my father. I still remember the day I got the call from the hospital back in Lahore. My mother had collapsed, and they were airlifting her to the city. I was in London at the time, just stepping out of an or after a 9-hour surgery. My scrub cap was still on when I answered. But what he said next cut deeper than any scalpel I'd ever held. "Don't come," my father said coldly. "You're not qualified to operate on her." I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. I asked again, slowly, if he understood I was one of the top surgeons in my field. He repeated himself, firmer this time, and then hung up. That's when I knew this wasn't about my skills. I booked a flight anyway. I was on the next plane home, not just because I needed to see my mother, but because I had to confront the reason behind his words. What had I done to deserve this kind of rejection? Or rather, what had I not done? The entire flight, I thought back to my childhood, how my father, a retired military officer, had always wanted a son. How he'd treated my medical ambitions like an inconvenience, something I'd grow out of. I didn't. And maybe that was the problem. I landed in Lahore at 3:42 a.m. My brother Imran picked me up without saying much. His eyes were puffy, and the radio played too softly to fill the silence. He finally mumbled, "She's stable, for now." But he didn't mention Dad. That silence screamed louder than any sentence. When we got to the hospital, I didn't head straight to the ICU. I went to the nurse's station first. My mind was spinning. Was she conscious? Did she ask for me? Was she scared? The nurse looked up from her clipboard and gasped, "Dr. Layla Nasir? You're here." Her smile felt like a lifeline thrown into a storm. She stood and practically bowed. "You're on the schedule for the 8 a.m. consult, right? Dr. Tariq said you'd be the lead on this." "We're so honored, ma'am." My breath caught. Someone had requested me, but not Dad. Someone hired at IT. Turned out the hospital director, an old professor of mine, had overridden my father's rejection. "Your reputation precedes you, Dr. Nasir," he'd said over the phone. "I trust you more than anyone else. Your mother is lucky you're her daughter." I wish my father thought the same. I walked into the ICU, past rows of humming machines, and patients in various states of fragility. When I saw my mother, frail and pale, wires in her arms and oxygen in her nose, I felt the doctor in me fade. I was just her daughter again, but standing beside her bed was my father, arms crossed, face carved in stone. His eyes flicked to me. No warmth, no gratitude, just disbelief that I'd come anyway. "She doesn't need you. We have good doctors here," he said under his breath. I stepped closer, feeling the heat rise to my face. "I'm the best doctor here," I whispered. "You just can't see past the fact that I'm your daughter." He didn't reply, just turned away and sat down, as if that settled the matter. But it didn't. It never had. I spent the next 4 hours reviewing my mother's scans, conferring with colleagues, and outlining a plan. Her heart had a rare valve defect, something most surgeons had little experience with, but I had published a paper on it during my residency. I knew this case better than anyone. I scrubbed in at exactly 7:58 a.m. The OR was cool and sterile. But my thoughts burned, not with nerves, but with a strange mix of grief and defiance. This wasn't just about saving her life. It was about proving I was never the failure he claimed I was. The surgery lasted nearly 6 hours. At one point, her pulse dropped to a terrifying low, and for a moment, the whole room froze. But I didn't. I knew exactly what to do, and within minutes, we stabilized her. I closed her chest with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before, because I had. When I stepped out of the OR, I was met by a wall of silence. My father stood across the hall, arms still folded, like a soldier waiting for battle. I removed my mask, walked up to him, and said quietly, "She's alive, and she's going to be okay." His expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. "Do you want to see her?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not yet," then turned and walked away. I stood frozen, not out of shock, but out of sorrow. There it was. I had performed a surgery that only a handful of doctors in the country could have done, and still, I wasn't enough. But what happened next shifted something I didn't expect. Later that evening, as I sat by my mother's bed, holding her hand, she stirred and opened her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. You came, she said. I did, Amma, I replied, brushing her hair back. You saved me, she murmured. I heard them say your name. Top doctor in the hospital. I laughed softly, blinking back tears. Wouldn't have missed it. For the world. And then she said something I never expected. Your father, he's proud. He just doesn't know how to say it. I didn't believe her. Not then. But I nodded anyway. Sometimes we have to let people have their illusions. But 2 days later, I found something, tucked into my mother's bedside drawer. A letter in my father's handwriting. It wasn't addressed to me. It was to her. It said Layla is performing the surgery tomorrow. I didn't want her to. Not because she isn't good, but because I'm terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose both of you? I watched her grow into this brilliant force, and I never said it out loud, but I've never been more proud. Maybe I was wrong to keep her at arm's length. Maybe she's not the one who needs to change. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. And then I cried, for all the years I thought I was invisible to him. For all the times I believed I had to earn my place in my own family. And for the truth I had always known deep down, I was never unqualified. Just unrecognized. Before I flew back to London, he came to the airport. Just stood there in his stiff posture, hands behind his back like always. I read your note, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He looked surprised. Then shrugged, as if embarrassed. I didn't mean for you to. I'm glad I did, I said, cutting him off gently. He nodded, then cleared his throat. Layla, thank you. For saving her. There was a pause, for being who you are. That was all he said. But it was enough. Sometimes, a few words carry the weight of 1,000 unsaid apologies. As my plane ascended into the clouds, I stared down at the city lights, thinking about the roles we're forced into, how being a daughter, a doctor, a woman, often feels like walking a tightrope. But maybe that's where our strength lies, in balancing all of it without falling. Back in London, I returned to my hospital, where nurses greeted me not just as Dr. Nasir, but as the one who'd performed the impossible. Back home, word had spread, as they always do in the medical community, but something had changed. Not in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. I had faced the one surgery I dreaded most, not the one in the OR, but the one that required opening old wounds, confronting inherited doubts, and stitching together a sense of self that had long been torn. And in doing so, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't just qualified for my mother's surgery, I was born for it, because I wasn't just her daughter. I was her healer, her legacy, and finally, my father's pride. And that was the real surgery no one saw, the one that healed us all. I returned to my flat that evening with the lights off, shoes in hand, and the silence louder than anything else. Normally, I'd throw myself into a journal article or case notes, something to keep the stillness from swallowing me. But this time, I didn't. I let it settle around me, like a fog slowly lifting, not trapping. I sat down by my bookshelf, where my medical school diploma hung beside my fellowship certificate from the Royal College. For the first time in years, I stared at them not with pride, but with peace. But even then, something felt unfinished, like a thread dangling that needed tying up. So I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a medical paper or a research summary, but a letter. To my father. I didn't know if he'd ever read it, or if he'd even understand the emotion behind the words. But I needed to write it, not for him, but for me. For the little girl who once held a toy stethoscope in her hand and was laughed at. For the young woman who stayed up 3 nights straight in med school hoping someone would notice her worth. For the daughter who finally realized she didn't need permission to shine. I wrote, Dear Baba, I understand fear now. Not just the fear of losing someone you love, but the fear of not knowing how to love them right. Maybe that's what you felt when I said I'd do Amma's surgery. That if something went wrong, you'd never forgive me, or yourself. But I need you to know something. I didn't become a doctor to prove anything to you. I did it because it's who I am, and I will never stop being her. Not for you. Not for anyone. But I'll always be your daughter too. And I forgive you. Love, Layla. I saved it, printed a copy, and mailed it to the old house in Lahore. Then I closed my laptop and let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting a lifetime. A week later, I received a message from my brother. It was a photo of my father, sitting on the front porch, holding the letter. The edges were worn, like he'd read it more than once. In the background, my mother was smiling. He doesn't say much, Imran texted, but he kept the letter in his wallet. That was all I needed. Over the next few months, I continued my work, leading surgeries, mentoring residents, speaking at conferences. I even got nominated for a national award for excellence in surgical innovation. Yet, no accolade felt as profound as the unspoken reconciliation slowly unfolding between me and my father. He started messaging occasionally. Just short texts, how's weather in London, or Amma said she misses you. Once, he even sent a blurry photo of an article about me in a Pakistani medical journal. No caption, just the picture. But it spoke louder than 1,000 compliments. Eventually, my parents visited. I invited them to the hospital. It was the first time my father stepped into my world. He walked slowly, scanning the halls, peeking through windows into labs, eyeing plaques on the walls with my name etched in gold. I watched him absorb it all, not with the critique I used to fear, but with quiet awe. When we reached the surgical board listing lead doctors for the week, he stared at my name at the top. "You run this place?" he asked, not sarcastically, but with a strange softness. "Not all of it," I smiled. "Just the operating room." He nodded, then muttered something I'd never forget. "Looks like it runs well." That night, after dinner, he handed me a gift, an old, beat-up journal with yellowed pages. "It was mine when I was in the army," he said. "I thought you might want to write your own stories now." Inside were sketches of maps, coordinates, and halfway through, scribbled thoughts. Some were about war, others about family. And near the end, dated a year after I entered medical school, was a single line. "Maybe she's stronger than I thought." I closed the journal, tears gathering before I could stop them. For once, I didn't hide it. He didn't turn away either. "Thank you, Baba," I whispered. "You made me proud." He finally said it wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. But it landed deep, like the final stitch that seals a wound shut. Years have passed since that surgery. My mother is healthy and full of stories now, especially the one where her daughter fixed her heart, literally and metaphorically. My father still doesn't say much, but every time I video call, he waits in the background until I wave that he waves back. That's our language now. Silent gestures that speak volumes. And as for me, I still operate, still teach, still carry the title a top doctor, but the label doesn't define me anymore. I wear it with humility, not hunger, because I've learned that being the best isn't about who claps for you. It's about who you become when no one's looking, when your hands are steady, your heart is loud, and your voice finally stops asking for permission to say yes. My dad once told me I wasn't qualified for my mother's surgery, but when the nurse greeted me as the top doctor, she wasn't just validating my title, she was witnessing my becoming. And in that moment, when her words echoed through the white-walled corridor, I realized something I hadn't before. Recognition doesn't always come from where you want it. Sometimes, it arrives from the lives you've touched, the strangers you've healed, and the people you least expect. And sometimes, just sometimes, it echoes back home. 2 months after that hospital visit, I was invited to speak at a medical conference in Islamabad. It was a prestigious event, Global Minds, Breakthrough Research, panels where surgeons from around the world shared not just science, but soul. I accepted, but I added a personal clause. I wanted to bring my parents along. I called Amma first, knowing she'd be thrilled. She cried when I told her. "Finally, people will see what I've always known," she said. But it was Baba I was nervous about. I didn't ask him directly. I just said, "Amma's coming to the conference. You're welcome too, if you want." There was a long pause. Then, what day should I wear the suit? It might have seemed small to others, but to me, it felt like the walls he had built for decades were finally beginning to crack. On the day of my keynote, the auditorium was packed. Bright lights, cameras, translators for international guests. It was far more glamorous than an or, but somehow less intimidating. My name was printed boldly on the program, Dr. Layla Nasir, keynote speaker, rebuilding hearts and healing generations. I stood behind the podium, palms resting lightly on the edge, and scanned the crowd. I saw my colleagues, my mentors, and then, 2 rows back on the left, I saw them. Amma sat with her hands clasped, beaming. And beside her, in his navy suit with medals from decades ago still proudly pinned to his chest, sat Baba. He didn't smile, but his eyes met mine. And he nodded at that nod. It was everything. I began my speech, not with medical jargon or a PowerPoint slide, but with a story. A long time ago, someone told me I wasn't qualified, that I wasn't enough, but I stood in front of a woman I loved more than anything, and I opened her chest to save her heart, not to prove myself, but because I knew I could, and in doing so, I healed more than one body. I healed silence, I healed doubt, I healed years of unseen labor, and today, I stand here, not just as a surgeon, but as a daughter who kept going even when the world turned its back, because the truth is that we don't just carry scalpels and stethoscopes, but we carry stories, legacies, wounds, and the ones who keep walking despite them, are the ones who truly change lives. I didn't notice the standing ovation until the mic was turned off. People clapped. Some cried, but all I cared about was what happened next. My father stood, straightened his back, and started clapping. That moment still plays in my memory like a sacred reel, over and over. Not for the applause, but for the acknowledgement. Not for the title, but for the healing. That evening, we returned to the hotel. Amma fell asleep quickly, but Baba asked to sit on the balcony. I joined him, watching the city lights flicker like stars grounded to earth. You spoke well, he said after a long silence. Thank you, I replied. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, he added, I was wrong. I turned to him, unsure of what he meant exactly. I let fear speak louder than faith, he continued. And I didn't know how to be proud of you without feeling small myself. I reached over and placed my hand on his. You never had to shrink, Baba. You raised me. I am because you were. His eyes watered. The first time I'd seen that, I never thought a daughter could carry what you've carried, he whispered. I smiled. Turns out, daughters carry the world. From that night onward, things shifted between us, not dramatically, not all at once, but gently, like the changing seasons. He began introducing me to friends as my daughter, the top doctor. He started reading the articles I wrote. He even attended one of my university lectures in Lahore, sitting in the back row like a quiet student. One day, I caught him dusting the shelf in his study. He paused on a framed photo of me in my scrubs, next to a newspaper clipping about the surgery I did on Amma. He turned to me and said, you were born to heal. I just took too long to see it. That sentence, coming from a man who once dismissed my dreams like broken glass, meant more than any plaque, any award, any degree I'd ever earned. Now, years later, as I train new residents and oversee surgical teams, I make sure to remind them, talent will take you far, but belief, especially self-belief, will take you further. And every time I scrub in, I carry a few things with me: a scalpel, a steady hand, a quiet strength passed down through generations, and a memory of the moment my father clapped *, because for all the patients I've saved, that one surgery healed something far more delicate than a heart. It healed a bond. It healed a lifetime of silence, and it reminded me that no matter who doubts you, when you show up, when you speak truth, and when you lead with love, you don't just earn respect, you rewrite it. And I'll keep doing that, one heartbeat at a time. Some stories, I've learned, don't end, they evolve. And the one between my father and me still grows, even now, in the quiet moments where words are few but presence speaks volumes. One winter afternoon, about a year after the conference, I was invited back to my old medical college in Lahore. They were naming a new mentorship program after me, the Dr. Layla Nasir Fellowship for Women in Surgery. I almost declined the event due to my busy schedule, but something told me I needed to be there. Not for the cameras or the speeches. For something deeper. I flew in a day early and stayed at my parents' house. It had changed so little. The floral wallpaper in the hallway, the same squeaky kitchen drawer, and in the living room, framed photos that now included one of me standing beside the Prime Minister, receiving a medal for National Medical Service. I found Baba in the garden, trimming the roses he planted years ago for Amma. Without looking up, he said, they called me. Said I'd be sitting in the front row tomorrow. I smiled. You okay with that? He didn't answer right away. Then, I already ironed my best shalwar kameez. We both chuckled, but the air between us wasn't just light, it was warm, familiar, safe. The kind of warmth I used to long for as a child. The next day, I stood on the same stage where I had once received my medical school graduation certificate. Only this time, I stood behind a podium not as a student, but as a symbol of change, of persistence, of what it means to fight through silence and be heard anyway. You don't need to come from power to create it, I told the hall full of bright-eyed girls. You don't need permission to be extraordinary. You just need one reason to keep going, and mine, for a long time, was proving that I mattered. As the audience erupted into applause, I looked down to the front row, and there he was. My father. He didn't clap as hard as Amma, who beamed with both pride and eyeliner tears, but his hands did move. His eyes locked with mine. And this time, he didn't nod. He stood. The crowd took a moment to notice him, but I didn't miss it. He placed his hand over his heart. That was all I needed. After the ceremony, he waited as people surrounded me, offering congratulations and photo requests. He stood back, like always, not one to push his way through. When we finally walked side by side to the car, he spoke. I never imagined that you'd go this far. You didn't have to, I said. I did. He stopped walking. I'm glad you didn't listen to me. I would have kept you small. There was a tenderness in his voice I hadn't heard since I was a child. And then, as we sat in the car, he said something I would carry with me for life. I thought protecting you meant limiting you. But it turns out, you never needed protection. You needed space. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say, only everything to feel. Since that day, we've built something new. Not perfect. Not storybook. But real. He asks me questions now, not just about surgery or travel, but about dreams. "What's next for you, Layla?" he'll ask over chai, and I'll tell him things I never used to. About my ideas for global medical outreach, or a book I've been slowly writing on women in medicine. And every time, he listens. No dismissive sighs. No walls. Just attention. One afternoon, after watching a documentary on women doctors in conflict zones, he said, "I wish I could have served under someone like you when I was in the army. You lead with both head and heart." It was the highest praise I'd ever received, from the man who once told me I wasn't enough. Now, when I return home to Lahore, I don't walk in with the need to prove anything. I walk in as a daughter, loved, trusted, and finally seen, and when I scrub in back in London, I sometimes carry a tiny photo of my parents tucked in my coat pocket. It's not for luck. It's for memory. For truth, because I never became a doctor to be the best, I became a doctor to be whole, and in that journey, I didn't just save lives, I saved the bond that nearly died between a father and a daughter, and that, perhaps, is my greatest operation yet. A few months later, I received an invitation to speak at the United Nations Women's Summit in Geneva. The theme was Breaking Barriers, Voices that Heal Across Generations. I was stunned. The UN, me. A woman from Lahore who once hid medical textbooks under her bed because her father didn't believe in her dream. I almost declined again. Doubt still whispers, even when you're called top doctor. But Amma, over a late-night call, said something simple: "If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And they'll miss the truth." So I said yes. I arrived in Geneva on a snowy morning, the city draped in elegance and silence. The conference hall was massive, with rows of seats filled with changemakers, diplomats, survivors, and leaders. As I walked to the stage, the screens behind me lit up with my name, Dr. Layla Nasir, surgeon, storyteller, daughter. That last word hit me the hardest. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't start with statistics or case studies. I started with the moment that haunted and defined me. "My father once told me I wasn't qualified to operate on my own mother," I said. The room stilled. He wasn't being cruel. He was afraid. But what he didn't realize was, so was I. Not of failing as a surgeon, but of never being seen as enough. I walked into that operating room carrying not just medical tools, but generational silence. I stitched a valve back together. I repaired a heart, but more importantly, I mended a fracture between a father and a daughter that had been breaking for years. Tears glistened in the eyes of women in the front row. Some nodded, others clutched their hearts. I continued, pouring out the full story, how cultural expectations, unspoken grief, and fear of female power had nearly broken me, and how I fought for my place anyway. Women in medicine aren't just fighting diseases. We're fighting silence. We're fighting doubt. And often, we're fighting the people we love the most, because they were never taught to believe we could lead. When I finished, the standing ovation didn't feel like validation. It felt like shared understanding. Later that evening, I received a text from Baba. Just 5 words: "I watched. I heard you." And below it, a photo that he was sitting in our old living room in Lahore, Amma by his side. On the screen behind them, frozen in mid-speech, was me, his daughter, his surgeon, his pride. I broke down in my hotel room. Because it was in that moment that I realized, he wasn't just hearing me now. He was finally listening, and through him, I was healing the fathers of daughters everywhere who didn't know how to love out loud. Now, I speak more often, at universities, at hospitals, at forums for women in leadership. I've even started mentoring girls in South Asia who dream of medicine but fear the backlash of family traditions. One of them, a shy 16-year-old from Multan, once asked me, "What if my father never supports me?" I looked her in the eyes and said, "Then become the kind of woman who helps him unlearn everything that made him doubt you in the first place." She smiled. And I knew, deep down, another heart had been sewn back together. One evening, while sitting alone on my balcony back in London, I opened Baba's old army journal again. I flipped through it slowly until I found a blank page. I picked up my pen. Entry: "Today I healed 1,000 hearts this year. 1 was my mother's. 1 was my own, and 1 belonged to my father." The wind picked up, rustling the pages gently, almost like a nod, and in that stillness, I smiled, not because the story had ended, but because it had finally begun anew. Because when the nurse greeted me as the top doctor, she didn't just announce my title, she acknowledged my journey, and that journey, long, fractured, raw, and real, became my greatest story. A story of healing. A story of resilience. A story of a daughter who was more than enough all along. A few weeks after Geneva, something unexpected happened. My hospital back in London asked if I'd consider leading a new department focused on surgical innovation and mentorship for underrepresented communities. It was an opportunity one never dared to dream about when I first arrived as a junior resident, fresh-faced and uncertain, but now I was ready. I said yes, and within months, the Layla Nasir Surgical Leadership Initiative was born. We didn't Just trained surgeons, we mentored them, shaped their confidence, and offered them what I once lacked, unwavering belief. One afternoon, I hosted a seminar titled, Healing Beyond the Operating Room. It was intimate, about 30 young professionals, many of them first-generation doctors like myself. I told them the story. All of it. From the moment my father denied me the chance to operate on my mother, to the moment he stood and clapped. At my keynote, they didn't blink once. Every face stared back, locked in silent understanding. At the end, a young woman raised her hand. Her voice cracked as she asked, "What gave you the strength to stand your ground when even your own family doubted you?" I paused, and then I told her the truth. I used to think strength came from proving people wrong, but it actually came when I realized I didn't fight to be seen as better than anyone. I fought to be seen, period. And once I saw myself clearly, no one else's doubt could define me again. She wept. And she wasn't the only one. That's the thing about personal stories. They don't end where the victory begins. They ripple forward, changing lives we may never even meet. A few days later, I received a message from a surgeon in Karachi. She had read about my Geneva speech online and shared how she'd almost quit after her family refused to attend her graduation. Her message said, "Your story made me stay. You reminded me that I don't need applause to matter. Just purpose." I cried reading it, because I remembered what that loneliness felt like. And now, to think that something born from my pain was holding up someone else's future, that was healing in its purest form. On my next trip back to Lahore, something extraordinary happened. Baba asked to visit my old school, the girls' high school where I first dared to speak about becoming a surgeon. The same place where, years ago, he'd dismissed my dreams with a chuckle and a shake of his head. Now, he wanted to speak there. I was shocked. "You want to give a speech?" I asked. He cleared his throat, pretending it was no big deal. Just a few words. And so, in a small assembly hall filled with bright-eyed students and proud teachers, my father stood at the podium. Dressed in his crisp white shalwar kameez, medals gleaming, voice steadied. He said, "When my daughter was young, I thought protecting her meant telling her what not to do. But I see now that true protection means standing beside her, even when I don't understand. She didn't need my permission, she needed my belief, and if I could go back, I would tell her sooner. I am proud. I was always proud, I just didn't know how to show it." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Not even mine. As we walked back to the car, I took his hand. "That was brave," I said. He squeezed it gently. "I learned from the bravest person I know." We drove home quietly, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable. It was peaceful, full. He didn't need to say more. Neither did I. That night, sitting on the rooftop under a Lahore sky peppered with stars, I looked out at the city that raised me and tried for so long to keep me small. And I whispered something into the night, just for myself. I made it. Not in spite of them, but with them. Because now I knew, forgiveness isn't just a gift we give to others. It's one we give to ourselves. My father had finally seen me, but more importantly, I had never stopped seeing myself. And that, more than the surgeries, the awards, the stages, or the headlines, was my greatest triumph. That I had become what I once only dreamed of being. A healer of hearts. A bridge across generations. A daughter, a doctor, and a legacy that would live on, not just through medicine, but through memory. And so, when the nurse greeted me that day with wide eyes and reverence, "Top doctor," she said, she had no idea that behind that title stood years of silence, scars, and survival. And now, the whole story is finally stitched together. One heartbeat at a time. One belief at a time. One daughter at a time, and always, with love. A year later, I was invited to contribute a chapter to a global medical anthology titled The Hands That Heal. The editor asked for something technical, perhaps a groundbreaking surgical technique or case study, but instead, I submitted an essay titled When the Patient is the One You Love, and the Doubt is Your Own Blood. I wrote about my mother's surgery, yes, but not just the clinical steps or the precision of sutures. I wrote about my father's voice in that hospital corridor, the weight of his words, the ache that came not from failing, but from never being given the chance to prove I could succeed. The chapter ended like this: every surgery leaves a scar, but so do words, and sometimes, it's not the chest you open, but the silence, and in doing so, you don't just save a life, you resurrect a bond, you rewrite a legacy. The essay went viral in the medical community. Emails poured in from doctors, nurses, and daughters around the world, each with their own version of my story. Some were still fighting to be heard, others had broken through. And many had parents who never apologized, but who now watched quietly from the shadows of pride. One email stood out. It was from a medical student in Afghanistan. She had lost her father to war before he ever saw her graduate. But she wrote, "Reading your story gave me the closure I never had. You spoke to something in me I didn't have words for. That night, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home. Outside, the London rain tapped against the windows. Inside, I stared at my reflection in the blackened glass. I thought about every woman who was told, "You're not enough." Every girl who dreamed in a house that didn't know how to dream with her. Every daughter who became her own validation. And I made a decision. I called the hospital board and told them I wanted to fund a new scholarship. Not just for women in medicine, but specifically for those facing resistance at home. It would cover tuition, housing, books, and mentorship. I called it the Amy and Baba Fellowship, because despite the past, I wanted my parents' names to be remembered for what came next, not just what once was. I told Baba over tea one evening during a visit to Lahore. He blinked in surprise. "You named it after us?" I nodded. I wanted to honor how far we've come. Not just me. All of us. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You've turned every bruise into a blessing." I reached across the table and touched his hand. That's what daughters do. Now, each year, I fly back to Lahore for the fellowship ceremony. Baba always attends. He stands in the front row, chest straight, medals polished. He listens to every speech, watches every recipient hug their mother. And once, during a group photo, one student asked, "Sir, may I call you Baba too?" He smiled, and without hesitation, said, "Of course. I have many daughters now." That moment is framed in my clinic today, because that's the thing about healing, it multiplies. When we begin to forgive, to open, to tell the truth even when our voices shake, we give others permission to do the same. The girl I once was, the one hiding textbooks under her pillow, listening to her father's voice thunder down the hallways of doubt, she lives on inside me. But she's no longer afraid. She stands tall, sutures steady, heart wide open. And today, when I walk into an operating room, I still remember every step of that first surgery on my mother. The beeping monitor, the flash of steel, the heaviness of hope. But now, I carry something else, too. A quiet knowing that I was never just trying to heal her heart, I was healing ours. And every time a nurse says, "Dr. Nasir, you're up," I smile, because they see me, because he finally saw me, and because the woman I've become no longer needs permission to be powerful. She just is. Every stitch, every scar, every story etched in time. This is how we heal, this is how we rise, this is how daughters become legends. These days, when I stand before new cohorts of students and interns, some eager, some uncertain, some bearing the same invisible wounds I once carried, I remind them of something we often forget in the world of medicine. Healing doesn't only happen on operating tables. IT happens in conversations we were too afraid to have. IT happens in the quiet space between a daughter and her father, where love finally overpowers silence. I tell them about my first patient, the one who mattered most, my mother, and about the first obstacle, not a tumor or a failing organ, but doubt. I tell them about the day I was told I wasn't qualified, and the day I was called the top doctor in the room, and how both of those days lived inside me like twin flames, competing, burning, shaping me into who I became. After every lecture, students come up, young women mostly, some with shaking voices, asking questions I know by heart. What if no one believes in me? What if I don't feel strong enough? What if my family never understands? And I give them the same answer every single time: you don't need everyone to believe in you, you just need to believe in yourself loudly enough, until the world learns to listen. One girl, Fatima, once said, "You make it sound like the pain never won." I smiled softly. "Oh, Fatima, the pain wins some days, but it never gets to stay. Because that's the truth of legacy, it's not made in a moment. It's carved across decades, one choice, one stitch, one word at a time." Last year, Baba fell ill. Nothing major, just age catching up. But this time, he was the patient that he insisted on coming to London for treatment. "I want to be in your hands," he said. The very same hands he once doubted. And on the day of his procedure, as I stood beside his bed pre-op, he looked at me, not as the soldier, not as the patriarch, but as a father. He reached for my hand and said, "If I don't wake up, don't say that." I cut in. "No, listen," he said, gripping tighter. "If I don't wake up, know this: I have lived long enough to see my daughter become everything I was too afraid to imagine." He did wake up, of course. The surgery went smoothly. But I walked out of that or changed again, not because of the surgery, but because of the trust in his eyes before I began. That was the final healing. The last thread stitched. Now, every Sunday, I video call my parents from my flat in London. Amma updates me on her roses. Baba updates me on my articles, read aloud from the Urdu newspaper with careful pride. It's quiet, uneventful, loving, and that, I think, is the reward after all the battles. Peace, wholeness, home. I look around at the life I've built. Not a palace, not a parade, but a life of purpose. A hospital wing full of young women who call me mentor. A family that once resisted, now rooted in respect. A reputation earned not by shouting, but by showing up over and over, until the silence broke. I sometimes take out the old army journal he gave me, its pages filled with history, loss, maps of survival. And in the final blank space, I added one last line: doubt raised me, belief rebuilt me, love made me whole. So now, when I hear my name echo in corridors, Dr. Layla Nasir, or Reddy, I smile, because the world sees a top doctor, but I see her, the girl who once stood outside her father's office, unheard, unseen, unloved in the way she needed. And I tell her, in my heart you made it, not just into the room, you became the room, and now, you're the one holding the scalpel, and the story. And as I stand in that room, the one they once said I didn't belong in, I realize I'm not just holding the scalpel to heal others, I'm holding it to honor the girl who kept going when no one clapped, the woman who dared to believe that quiet courage was still courage, the daughter who transformed silence into legacy. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her in my reflection as I scrub in tired eyes, steady hands, heart wide open. And I whisper inwardly, like a prayer passed down from the generations of women before me who never got the chance: I see you. I trust you. I'm proud of you. And with that, I step into the operating theater, the lights above hum to life, the team around me waits for instruction. The nurse, Sarah, one of my best, smiles and says, "Top doctor, all ready?" I smile back. "Let's begin." But in truth, we began a long time ago. We began the day I dared to love myself more than I feared their disbelief. We began the day I chose to write my own name into history. We began the day I decided that legacy wasn't what I inherited, it was what I became. So here I am, a surgeon, a daughter, a quiet storm, a name whispered with respect across continents, hospitals, homes. And when I finish this surgery, just like all the others, I'll step out of into the world I carved for myself, not just a seat at the table but a place at the helm where young women can look at me and see not just possibility, but proof that no voice, no title, no shadow of doubt can bury a fire that was born to rise. I am Dr. Layla Nasir, a top doctor, teacher, healer, daughter, and this is only the beginning. And as the days turn to years, that beginning has bloomed into a movement far greater than I ever imagined. My clinic in London has become more than just a surgical center. It's a haven. A place where young women from every background walk in, not just to shadow a doctor, but to witness a revolution in quiet, confident form. Girls in hijabs. Girls with accents. Girls who were told they weren't leader material. They come, sit across from me, and I see it in their eyes, the ache I once carried, the fire I refused to let go, the hope they're still learning how to hold. I keep a drawer filled with letters from them, handwritten, folded carefully, slipped into my bag after lectures, or mailed to the hospital. Some are pages long. Some just a single sentence. Point one said, "I told my father I wanted to be like you. He didn't laugh this time." Another, "Your voice held space for mine." And one I'll never forget, "I didn't think people like us got to become history. Thank you for showing me we do." I keep these letters close. On the days when the world feels heavy, when the hospital is overwhelmed, when grief from a lost patient clings to my skin like fog, I read them. I remember the purpose beneath the pressure. The legacy beneath the title. I've learned something over the years that I now teach to every young doctor I mentor: there will always be noise, there will always be doubt, some of it from others, some of it from within, but the voice that must never fall silent is your own. I think back to the moment my father told me I wasn't qualified, and how, instead of breaking me, it became the thread that wove my spine. That thread now stretches across nations. IT holds up women rebuilding their place in homes that never honored them. The IT binds wounds deeper than scalpels can reach. IT turns every whispered "you can't" into a roar of "I did." Sometimes, when I visit schools or community centers, parents, fathers, especially, come up to me. They hesitate at first, but then they speak. "I didn't believe in my daughter before, but I do now. She showed me your video. I understand more. I used to say daughters should stay home. Now I brag about mine in medical school." I nod. I smile. I forgive, even when the hurt is not my own, because the healing belongs to all of us. On the 10th anniversary of my mother's surgery, we held a celebration in Lahore, not just for her recovery, but for what that day had given birth to. My parents stood with me, surrounded by fellowship students, colleagues, family, and friends. During the speech, Amma laughed and said, "She fixed my heart, but really, she fixed all of ours." Baba stood beside her, gray now, softer around the edges. His voice, when it came, was slow and clear. "I once tried to tell my daughter what she couldn't do, but now I travel the world telling people what she has done." His eyes met mine, no longer guarded, only full of love. And if I could leave just one message for fathers everywhere, it would be this: do not fear your daughter's strength, feed it, and watch her change the world. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, especially not mine now. When I operate, when I speak, when I teach, my hands carry their strength. To my mother's resilience, my father's transformation, my own relentless heart. I no longer ask for space. I create it. I no longer shrink to make others comfortable. I expand, and in doing so, invite others to rise with me. And when people ask me today, what does being a top doctor mean to you? I don't list my awards, or my surgeries, or the degrees on my wall. I tell them asterisk, it means holding the scalpel. Steady even when your voice shakes. IT means showing up when the world wants you. Quiet. IT means healing others without forgetting to heal yourself. IT means becoming the woman you once needed, and then turning around to light the path for those still finding their way. Asterisk, because that is what this journey has always been about. Not perfection, but becoming whole, and passing that wholeness forward. One daughter, one scar, one story at a time. So to every girl who was told she wasn't enough, to every woman still climbing, still hoping, still hurting, I see you. I was you, and now, I stand here, scalpel in hand, love in my chest, and truth in my voice. Not just the top doctor, but the heart of a revolution. And this is not my ending, this is my legacy. And legacies, I've learned, are not carved in stone or etched in metals. They are planted, like seeds, in people. In every daughter who now walks into an exam room unapologetically. In every father who steps back and lets his child step forward. In every heart once silenced that now dares to speak. I see my legacy every time a young intern looks me in the eye and says, because of you, I didn't give up. I feel it in the letters written by women who stitched themselves back together after being told they were too soft, too loud, too emotional, too much. I hear it in the trembling voices that still carry fire beneath their fear. But perhaps the truest measure of it came not from a medical award or an international stage, but in a quiet moment, in my parents' home, late one evening that we were sitting around the table, the lights dimmed low, tea glasses half empty, the city's evening call to prayer echoing in the background. Baba was watching the news silently. Amma was knitting. I had just returned from a talk in Peshawar where a girl had hugged me and whispered, "You remind me of who I want to be." I told them the story. Baba listened without interrupting, then turned toward me. "You're not just healing patients anymore," he said. "You're healing time." I didn't quite understand then, but later that night, as I sat alone under the stars on their rooftop, the same rooftop where I used to study anatomy by flashlight when power outages were long and my dreams felt longer, I realized what he meant. Asterisk, healing time means rewriting the parts of our past that tried to define our future. IT means refusing to be limited by the love that was offered conditionally. IT means reaching back into the silence and pulling forward a new sound, our own voice. That night, I looked up at the stars and whispered into the dark sky, "I forgive you. I thank you. I carry you with me." To the doubt.to, the pain.to, the girl I once was, and even to the father who couldn't see me, until he finally did. I've stopped needing validation now, not because I don't value it, but because I've found something stronger, a peace, the kind of peace that comes after fire, after fighting, after forgiveness. And now, in hospitals from Karachi to Cape Town to Cambridge, when I step into a new room, a new city, a new life, people don't always know my full story. They may know the title, the credentials, the headlines, but what matters most can't be read on a plaque or recited on a stage. It's the unshakable truth I now carry in my bones. I became who I needed. I became who they never imagined. I became entirely, fiercely, freely, myself, and through that becoming, I carved open space for others to follow. One girl at a time. One heart at a time. One unshakable, unstoppable, unforgettable legacy at a time. So when they ask me now, was it worth it? All of it, the silence, the doubt, the fight. I smile gently and I answer every single moment, because the girl they doubted became the woman they now call top doctor. And in her own quiet way, she healed the world. Some stories fade with time, mine only deepens. Asterisk, because long after the awards are forgotten and the applause dims, what remains are the lives touched, the hearts stirred, the doors left open for those who come after me. And the most powerful stories, I've come to learn, don't end with a title or a triumph. They echo, they become bridges, and they carry those who still walk in our footsteps. A few months ago, I returned to the hospital where I had first performed my mother's surgery. The building looked the same, gray walls, sharp corners, the smell of antiseptic and hope. But as I walked those halls, I realized something had changed at me. This time, I wasn't walking with trembling hands and a fractured heart. I was walking as a woman who had seen herself fully and without apology. A woman who had returned not to prove anything, but to give something back. I met with a group of final-year medical students there, many of them young women, some from rural towns, some the first in their families to even finish school. They sat in a semicircle, notebooks ready, eyes wide. One girl, her voice barely above a whisper, asked, "Dr. Layla, how do we face those who love us, but don't believe in us. I paused, then I told her the hardest truth I ever learned: you love them anyway, but you don't let their fear become your mirror. You walk forward, not to spite them, but to show them a different way, because sometimes, belief doesn't arrive ahead of your greatness, sometimes, it follows it. She blinked fast, fighting tears. I didn't need her to say more, because I was her once. After the session, as I was leaving, a nurse stopped me in the hallway. She looked familiar, and then I realized she had been in the day of my mother's surgery. The same nurse who had looked at me and said, "Top doctor." She smiled now, lines around her eyes deepened with time. "You still walk like you belong," she said. I laughed gently. "That day, I wasn't sure I did." She touched my arm. "You did. We all saw it. Before you did. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of it all, how belief, even when distant, can still surround you. Waiting. Watching. Ready to rise when you finally see it in yourself." That evening, I stood on the rooftop of my parents' home one more time. The Lahore air thick with jasmine and memory. Baba joined me, slow but steady. "You've gone far," he said, staring out at the city lights. "Farther than I ever imagined." I smiled. "Farther than I once believed I could." Then, he said something that struck me deep. "But what makes me proudest is not that you proved me wrong, it's that you never gave up on me, not even when I gave up on you." My breath caught. The silence between us now felt like a soft wind, and still, forgiving. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me something, a folded letter. Yellowed slightly at the edges. "I wrote this the day after your mother's surgery," he said. "But I never had the courage to give it to you." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside, in his neat, military script: "Layla, you saved her, and you saved me. I see you now. I am sorry, and I am so proud to be your father." I held that letter to my heart, tears sliding silently down my face. For all the words we had spoken over the years, these were the ones I'd waited for, and now, I didn't need them, but I cherished them anyway. Because healing doesn't erase the past, it honors it, stitches it into something new, something whole. If you're reading this, if you're a daughter who's ever been doubted, dismissed, or diminished, know this: your story is not over, your voice is not too small, and your dreams are not too much. You were not born to be silent, you were born to shift rooms with your presence. Change minds with your courage. Break cycles with your tenderness. Rewrite history with your hands, your heart, your fire. And when they tell you you're not qualified, and smile, and walk into that room anyway. Because one day, not long from now, they won't just call you qualified, but they'll call you indispensable, that they'll call you leader, that they'll call you healer, that they'll call you top doctor, and more importantly, you'll call yourself enough, always enough, powerfully, wholly, and beautifully, you. And so, as I sit here tonight, alone in my London flat, city lights casting quiet shadows on the floor, I think about everything it took to arrive at this place, not just the exams passed, not the surgeries completed, not the titles earned, but the valleys walked through in silence, the rooms entered where I wasn't wanted, the conversations I had to have, and the ones I never did. I think about the days I stood trembling in hospital corridors, hoping someone would vouch for me, believe in me, see me, and the days I stood tall, knowing I was enough whether they did or not. I think about my father's letter, still folded gently in my journal, and about the first time he introduced me to someone and said, "This is my daughter, Dr. Layla Nasir, the best surgeon I know." No hesitation, no qualifiers, just truth, and that truth became mine, too. But now, the story continues, not in me alone, but in the hundreds of young women I've taught, mentored, and stood beside. Some of them now lead surgical teams, some have opened clinics in the villages they once fled, some are still students, still scared, but walking forward anyway. They are, each in their own way, writing new chapters in our shared story. And when they ask me how to navigate a world that tells them they must shrink, dim, or wait, I say this: you are not a guest in the house of greatness. You are the foundation, the architect, the living proof that legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we build, with our bare hands and unshakable hearts. I've been called many things in my life: ambitious, defiant, difficult, emotional, extra, but I've never let those words define me. Instead, I let them remind me that I was never meant to be small, that my story, messy, painful, glorious, was always meant to be shared. Carry. Reach the daughters still wondering if they're allowed to dream. You always have been, and if no one ever told you this before, let me. Your voice matters, your dream matters, you are already worthy, no permission required. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, someone will walk up to you in a crowded hallway, just as the nurse once did with me, and say, "You're the one who gave me hope." And you'll remember this moment, this story, this truth, that even when they told you you weren't qualified, you didn't wait for the world to see you. You became the mirror for every woman who still couldn't see herself, and in doing so, you didn't just become the top doctor, you became the beginning of 1,000 other dreams, you became legacy, and your story? It will never end, it will only multiply, and as that story multiplies, as it moves from one voice to another like a sacred flame passed between trembling hands, it no longer belongs to just me, it belongs to the girl in the village who opens her biology book under candlelight, the daughter staring at her reflection, wondering if she can ever be more than what her family allows, the woman standing outside a closed door, hand raised, heart pounding, not knowing yet that she'll one day own the room inside, it belongs to you, whoever you are. Wherever you're reading this, because my story didn't begin with confidence, it began with resistance, not from strangers, but from the people I loved most, and that, perhaps, is the truest test of a dream, when it must rise not only against the world's disbelief, but from within the walls of your own home. But rise it can, rise it will, and when it does, it doesn't just change your life, it changes theirs too. I see that now when Baba holds hands with little girls at our fellowship gatherings and tells them, be brave, like my daughter. I see it in Amma's proud smile when she tells visitors, my daughter didn't just become a doctor, she became a voice. I see it in every family that walks into our clinic, unsure, afraid, and walks out hopeful, because someone like them was standing in the white coat. Hope, I've learned, is contagious, it multiplies quietly, and all it takes is one person to carry it with conviction. That's what I hope you take from this, more than anything, not just that I made it, but that your pain can be repurposed, your silence can be rewritten, your story, no matter how broken, doubted, or delayed, can still become power. The journey is not easy, but it is yours, and that alone makes it worthy. One day, years from now, I'll hang up my white coat. My hands will grow slower. My time in the operating room will come to an end, but I will not fade, because by then, the halls will be filled with voices louder than mine ever was. Girls who were once told no, now leading teams, teaching others, lifting sisters, and if anyone asks them how they got there, maybe, just maybe, one of them will say, there was a woman named Layla Nasir, she didn't give up to so I didn't either. And that, to me, will be the most important title I ever held, not top doctor, not surgeon, but permission giver. Firestarter. Legacy maker, the one who walked through the fire first so others could walk through the door. So I leave this last message for you, whoever you are. They might tell you you aren't qualified, but you are, you always were, and when you finally walk into that room, let them feel the power of every daughter who refused to disappear. Let them know, you're not just here to take up space, you're here to make it sacred, and in doing so, you won't just change the room, you'll change the world. I used to believe that stories like mine ended when success was reached, when the title was earned, the parent was proud, and the room finally opened its doors. But the truth? That's just where the real story begins, because once you make it through, once you breathe air that once felt unreachable, the most sacred responsibility you'll ever hold is to turn around and make it easier for the one coming next, and that's what I've dedicated my life to now. Every Saturday, I host a quiet mentorship circle in a small room tucked behind the main wing of the hospital. We sit in a circle, no white coats, no titles, no barriers. Just women, real women, future doctors, current students, nurses retraining in new specialties. Some are single mothers. Some are refugees. Some are the only girls in their families to finish secondary school, and every one of them carries a story in her chest that could break her, or bloom her. I'm not sure I belong here. One of them says, her voice trembling, I don't think I'm smart enough. Another adds, my father won't speak to me ever since I applied for medical school. Each time, I smile softly, not because their pain is small, but because I know just how powerful it is to speak it out loud, and I answer them the same way I once whispered to myself in hospital corridors at dawn, you already belong, even if no one ever told you, even if you walk alone, even if your hands shake the whole way through, you still belong. I tell them about the time I stitched a valve in my mother's chest. Even as my heart broke inside mine, I tell them about standing in front of surgical boards who didn't expect to hear excellence from a woman with an accent. I tell them about the silence I lived with before my father saw me fully, and I tell them how I survived it, not by hardening, but by staying soft, staying steady, staying here, because survival wasn't just about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to myself, day after day, that I was right to believe in the first place. One day, a woman in the group named Hannah came up to me after everyone had left. She had fled Syria, lost both parents, and was retraining as a nurse at age 34. I want to be a doctor, she said, voice barely above a whisper, but everyone tells me it's too late. I looked her in the eyes and said, you still have a heartbeat, Hannah. That means it's never too late. She cried in my arms that day. 2 years later, she's now entering her second year of med school. She still sends me a message every exam season that reads, simply, I'm still going. And that is the legacy I care about now, not my name. on plaques or walls, but my name etched quietly in someone's courage. Every time a woman applies to medical school because she heard my story, I feel it. Every time a father claps for his daughter because mine finally did, I know. Every time someone says, she made me believe it was possible, that is the echo of every no I endured, transformed into 1,000 yeses. I once thought the world needed me to be loud to be heard, but now I know it only needed me to be true, unshakably, unapologetically true. To show up again and again, sleepless, scared, unsure, and still choose to to choose love when silence is easier. To choose softness when bitterness calls louder. To choose purpose when the world wants you to disappear. That's what makes you powerful. Not perfection, not praise, but persistence, that soft, sacred fire inside you that refuses to go out, no matter how many times they try to snuff it. And to every woman reading this, thinking, but what if I'm not enough? Let me answer you clearly. You were born enough, not when they say so, not when the title comes, not when the applause follows, but right now. As you are, where you are, and if you ever forget that, come back to these words, let them hold you, let them remind you that someone before you walked this path. She stumbled, she bled, she healed, and then she wrote it all down for you to so now it's your turn. Take the exam, send the application, speak the truth, book the interview, walk into that room, your hands trembling, your voice cracking, and say, I belong here. And one day, not long from now, someone will stand before you, eyes wide, full of wonder and fear, and whisper, you're the reason I didn't quit. And you'll smile through tears and realize, you didn't just make it, you made the way.